was interesting to us to consider the proposal that Kunstler lays out, because then the question in our line of thinking becomes, well, what do we do and what are some solutions? So the next panel is composed of people that are approaching this question with an eye for building neighborhoods and community. The panel is moderated by Tim Davis of the Montana Smart Growth Coalition, and I've known Tim for several years and have always been impressed by the way at which he attacks community problems and looks legislatively at how to look for solutions through a very balanced eye. So Tim Davis.
And the way that I'm going to attack these problems today is I'll get off the stage very quickly. Today I'm just going to introduce our three panelists, and we will have about 30 minutes of presentation and then about 30 minutes of questions. So please hold your questions until after all three of the panelists have presented. Our first panelist will be Katie Selby. She's the co-founder of South Main, a traditional neighborhood development in Buena Vista, Colorado. Katie sees new urbanism as a perfect fusion of environmental sensitivity, social responsibility, and economic vitality. So she'll be giving kind of a local developer's perspective on solutions to the negative impacts of the growth pattern we've been seeing. Our second presenter will be Elaine Clegg, who was elected to the Boise City Council in November 2003, where she serves as currently as council president. And Elaine is an Idaho native. She's also been working for better growth and transportation planning for over 25 years, including work for the Idaho Smart Growth, where she was executive director from 1998 until shortly after she was elected to city council. And so she'll give a local government perspective on what we can do. And then Peter Werweth is Vice President of Enterprise Community Partners. Peter leads nationwide team of affordable housing consultants who help local governments and organizations conceive of and implement inclusionary zoning programs, housing trust funds, financial assistance programs for home buyers, land trusts, affordable housing land trusts, and large-scale community income land developments. So he'll give us a national perspective focused on affordable housing. So without further ado, I will have Katie start to do her presentation.
All right, thank you. I'm here to talk about South Main. This project is in a town called Buena Vista, Colorado. We're very central in the state. We're a small community. The highway runs here, and the historic Main Street is here. So, I get asked a lot, well, how did you become a developer? It's kind of a long answer, but in short, I very much came from an environmental background and was going to move to Alaska and never to return to the lower 48. But my brother kept calling me and found this property that was destined to be a timeshare resort. So we're kayakers, and I'll show a couple slides about that. And the river park and the potential for a public river corridor was one of the main inspirations. This is another image of our property. Goes right about like this. And so it's an infill property. We have some 1-acre sprawl to the south, the historic downtown to the west. And we hired Dover Cole & Partners, who are a new urbanist town planning and design firm, and they did a public charrette process where we invited members from the community and, newspaper, radio, flyers around town, got everyone involved, invited personally people that we thought would be of interest or be against us or anything like that to get their ideas. And our goal was to extend what the founders, what General Casson would have wanted to see when he designed this town. You can see that, all the buildings were designed to be right up to the sidewalk. It's mixed use. It's pedestrian friendly. You don't need a car to live there necessarily. And so with that, we started this inquiry, sprawl, what is sprawl? What are traditional neighborhoods and towns? And how do we extend this downtown to honor the riverfront and have it be a wonderful place? So this is the rendering that Dover Cole did at full build out, which could be any number of years away. But the river corridor, which is about 2.5 acres, we pushed the houses back. We made the public face of the houses face towards the river so that there's a permanent public river corridor with trails there. And then with that land donation, we got one of the longest whitewater parks in the country, financed through Great Outdoors Colorado, and also worked with the county commissioners to secure recreational water rights for the river. So this is the valley. It's kind of a high desert to the east, which is where we took this photo, and to the west, it's all 14,000-foot peaks. That's about 20 minutes away in the winter, and that's our property. So, you know, beforehand, the river was not very accessible. It was overgrown. We were actually, the Old Town Dump was our property, and this is what we did with the grant funding, and built whitewater features. That's actually my brother in a fib arc competition in Salida, half an hour away. This is our river park design. I knew it would be virtually impossible to see, but I just thought I'd throw it in there. We have a square on the river, and this shows the upper trail along the upper edge of the river, and then the lower trail along the bottom. And then these are some images of houses going up. You know, initially we sold the lots to the end user who got their own plans, and so some of these houses are quite large. And so in response to that, we're bringing in houses starting at 544 square feet this fall, and working with an architect named Marianne Casado, who's working with Lowe's to basically bring back something kind of like the Sears home called the Katrina Cottages. And also we formed the Buena Vista Merchants Association. The general idea being, you know, how do we unite the downtown businesses? We brought a farmer's market into town. There's a CSA farm that's being formed there, and so we're looking to support them and get this started, and also work with the local small businesses to foster the economy there. And then I just thought I'd end on that slide, so thank you.
Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to have to set this computer aside so that I have somewhere to. Thank you. I'm going to go low tech today. I decided it was maybe sometimes we rely a little bit too much on images and instead of what it is that we have to say. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the subject of how to reorganize our communities. I'm going to use the words that Jim Kunstler used to see if we can have some continuity in this. Reorganize our communities so that everyone has a place to live, that they can afford to live, and that the kind of living is frankly better than the way that we live today. From a policy standpoint, I think that there are things that we don't often talk about. We talk about the concepts of how we're going to do it, but actually getting down and implementing it, going from wishing it would happen to doing it, becomes the work of local policymakers. And it needs folks like you, some of you who are local policymakers, but others who aren't, to support it. And the first place it begins, at least in our world, is with good data. If you're talking about housing, or you're talking about how you're going to organize a community in terms of the development pattern, or how you're going to organize the transportation system, we rely on numbers. And are those numbers good or not often becomes a question of debate. But without at least some numbers and some idea about what it is you're trying to do, it's often difficult to make the right decision. If you're talking about housing, for instance, and you're talking about providing affordable housing, what's the problem in your town? Well, there are 8 or 9 different basic reasons that housing is unaffordable, and if you develop a policy for one of them that isn't the problem in your town, then you're going to be doing something that maybe even is counterproductive. So you need to figure out what's your income in your city. Is it, what's the 50% of median, what's 80% of median? gather that stuff for yourselves. I'm not going to give you examples because everybody's different. Specific examples, but in Boise, we know what 80% of median income is, and we know how much it costs to buy a house in Boise, and how many people at that 80% of median income can afford to buy a house, and frankly, not very many can, because our housing prices have risen higher or faster than our income. And so affordable housing is becoming an issue even in a place like Boise that's not a resort town, doesn't have second home buyers coming in and driving the prices up. The prices are being driven up by all kinds of factors, including the strength of our economy. Although, Councilor talked about the fact that our economy in the future probably is going to have to reorganize and probably won't be as strong. Right now, many of us, especially in the West, have an economy that is strong, is growing. In Boise, not only are we growing jobs, we're growing actually pretty good jobs. The income of those jobs is not the service income that a lot of places are seeing. And yet, even with that, we can't, the kids that are coming out of college with a computer science degree, and I'll use that as an example because this is my son, who gets a job at $50,000 to $60,000 a year, still can't afford to buy a house because the median house in Boise is $240,000. And without a down payment, that's higher than he can afford. So what's happening? Why would that be? Even in a place where the economy's strong, where the jobs are relatively good. And so we've looked in our city at what the reasons might be. And what we've found is that, first, housing prices have continued to have risen faster than income, even though income is relatively strong. Second, land prices have risen almost 3 times as fast as both housing prices and income. So land is becoming a factor. The third thing that's happening in Boise is that non-housing costs have risen exorbitantly higher compared to income. So those are the issues that we're going after. We're going after land prices first. And we're doing that by really looking at policies that encourage infill and encourage smaller lots. In Boise, we have a big portion of the original city that's platted in 25-foot wide by 100 to 140-foot deep lots. And originally, many of those lots were built with one house on 2 or 3 or even 4 lots. We've developed a policy that allows those lots to be infilled or refilled. Sometimes they were side lots and never built on in the first place, but only if you build a house that has some pretty high, decent design standards. We've also, with that ordinance, required that those houses be relatively small in size. They can only cover 50% of the total lot size. The FAR of the building can only be 50% of the total lot size. So in most cases, that keeps those houses below 1,400 square feet, which in today's market is relatively small, but that also helps keep them affordable. So we've tried to keep land prices more affordable by encouraging the development of smaller pieces of land. Land per acre is still quite high, but those smaller pieces allow us to build, the less expensive homes. It does another thing for us. It also begins to provide the density that we know we're going to need as we reorganize the way that we live in the future so that we have an opportunity for adequate transportation and other kinds of infrastructure. That gets at one of those other issues, the fact that non-housing costs are rising faster than income. Non-housing costs include transportation, they include energy costs, and in some instances they include other, the basic costs of life. But the two that we concentrate on are energy costs and transportation. Right now, we don't have a good public transportation system. It's a problem in Idaho that we don't have the kind of political tools, frankly, that we need to pay for it. We're working hard to get that. We are hopeful that in the next year or two, we will be able to pass legislation that will enable us to actually vote whether we want to pay ourselves for a transit system. We're confident if we can get the power to do that, people will support it because we have built a lot of support out there for it. So in anticipation of that, we're trying to reorganize the way that the community is built and the density of the community so that when we get the money to build a transit system, it actually has an opportunity to be successful. One of the other things that we're doing along those lines is, I'm sorry, I just saw the stop sign in it. I'm trying to think how to wrap up quickly. One of the other things that we're doing is a policy to encourage local agriculture. We're actually building that into our comprehensive plan so that local agriculture doesn't become an afterthought that maybe gets supported and maybe works in our region, but actually is part of our comprehensive plan. We'll identify places where we want agriculture to happen. We'll identify ways to help incent farmers markets and other ways for people to form those cooperative bonds that they need to make that kind of stuff work. And then finally, we're redoing our entire comprehensive plan around these principles so that we'll be ready to reorganize in the future. That's, I don't know any other way to do it as a policymaker. It isn't going to happen overnight. It is going to happen over time, and the more prepared you are for it, I guess I would say the better off we're going to be. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I came back to Missoula. I've been here a number of times, but I travel around a lot, and I never miss a chance to talk to van drivers and taxi drivers and waiters and waitresses about life in their city, because I'm interested in ultimately in the housing problems of people sort of in the bottom ranks income-wise, which does not speak to their value to society. Many of them are doing the jobs we all need. So I rode back from the airport with a van driver, and I said, how do you like Missoula? Oh, great city. It's growing too fast. So, and I said, well, what about? I didn't even ask. He said, well, the big problem is housing. And I said, well, how does that play out? And he said, well, the minimum price of a house in Missoula is about at $220,000 now, and that speaks to a lot of things. A lot of the ways we look at enterprise and our partners in different cities look at these housing markets. I'd ask a question. A $220,000 house. What's an affordable income? What does it take to buy a $220,000 house? Who would take a stab at that? 70,000, 80? That's about right. Actually, if you stretch and you have really affordable financing, which some of the banks have, you might get it down to 60. Second question, what percentage of the families in Missoula do you think, all right, let's pick 75 between those numbers. I looked this up this morning. What percentage? I didn't hear. Speak up. 10%. Higher. Keep going. Keep going. It's 65%. So out of the mouths of van drivers come some great revelations. I think there's three things that we can learn from that. A lot of the people who are really in the middle of this problem understand this problem better than some of us who look at it from on high. He got right to the heart of the problem. And it's the bottom number, not the median price, that's important in any market. It took us a long time to learn that and doing analysis, but really when you learn what sort of the bottom rents are and the bottom home prices, you learn a lot about what needs to be produced, because where the market's working, you don't need to interfere, and this seems very simplistic, but below that is where we need to do the work. And I think the third thing you learn from that is that we, and people like us in this room, who do a lot of the visioning and planning for solutions, perhaps aren't that, we're not in the middle of the problem. How many people here earn, their family, whole family, earns less than $75,000 a year? So, not a majority, a good number. So, it's all our problem. I have a handout, and I'm not nearly going to go through all of it, but just use that as illustration. I think one of the things I want to mention in that, there's a slow emergency in the housing realm of our economy that started back in the 60s. A simple fact that's on the back of that sheet is that in 1965, a minimum wage earner could buy a home for about 3 times their income. At that time, minimum wage was about $1.70. And today, in most markets, and I don't even mean the hot markets, not the Aspens, but probably the Missoulas, certainly Durango where I'm working, it's about 20 to 25 times the minimum wage income. And what that says is that the underlying problem is that incomes have not kept up with housing prices. And there are a number of reasons I will not go into, but there's some thoughts about that on the handout. So back to this, just to visualize one community. This is a study we just did for the city of Durango and La Plata County, their new regional housing authority. And again, this shows that it's roughly 80% of the residents of that county have incomes under $75,000. And those are almost exactly the group that's priced out of new housing. They can find older housing, they can find a few mobile homes, but that's not sustainable. If prices keep going up the way they are, it's going to be even a larger number. It's the bottom 3 bars that in that particular community are priced out. It's not untypical of a lot of Western mountain communities. I don't know if you can see the numbers, but it's just helpful. This is just simple math. Who can afford what at what income levels? And you can see again that $75,000 number annual income, it's about $275,000. 50,000, it's 185. It's just simple economics. And there are really only 2 ways to get at this. One is to reduce the price, and we heard some really good ideas that need to be practiced more. The small lot zoning, encouragement of small houses, that's one way to start filling that gap. And another is financing, and there's some others I'll talk about in a minute. But this is just La Plata County. This is just showing you the very recent trends. It's just an extension of a trend that's been going on for 40 years in this country. That incomes, the bottom red line, are not keeping up with home prices. That's a median income in La Plata County. That's the median home price. I'm sure you've seen that all over the West. This is the percentage of home sales at prices of $275,000 or less, which is kind of that floor price that's affordable in La Plata County. So it is a slow emergency. What can be done about it? I'm not going to go through this whole chart. Some of it's already been mentioned. I'm sure more will come up in discussion. But I'll just give a quick example of one city that we were fortunate enough to work with starting in 1991, the city of Santa Fe, which had no housing programs to speak of except the Housing Authority, which has the usual set of public housing and rent subsidies, which were a very valuable resource, but nothing was being added. There was a huge sense of crisis. There was a survey by the United Way in 1991 that said that affordable housing was the #1 problem of the community, far and above any others, and certainly they have others. The city started a strategic planning process that we were involved with, and it was in a mood to really think big. And the process involved businessmen, builders, nonprofits, public officials. Out of that came a goal to build 700 affordable units in 3 years. And a lot of times those plans sit on the shelf and you wish you'd never committed to a goal like that. But in this case, they actually did it, and they did it quickly. They did it by setting up some special purpose nonprofits that started the first home buyer training, counseling, and financial assistance programs. There were a few affordable homes in the market. We helped get local people into that, local workers with low incomes. Shortly after that, the city purchased 850 acres of land in a failed development. It was a thing of the time. There was a big sag in the market, and they were able to buy this at a bargain price. It's being developed, still being developed by a nonprofit land developer. It's going to end up with 4,000 units of housing. It's about half built, and 40% of the homes are either affordable homes or rental units, and they've kept true to that goal. So the average discounted home price is about $150,000. The typical rent using federal tax credit program is about $550. So they've actually been true to those goals. They've gone ahead and produced special needs housing, provide local general funds for this, set up trust funds. I won't go into all the details, but this is just to show the communities that we find that approach this do not look for a silver bullet. Don't just look to land use regulations. As important as those are, don't just look to inclusionary zoning, but it's a whole system. And the handout just gives you a sense of that. I'll just end by showing not the Ross Perot type charts, but some pictures of where this has been done right. This is a condominium project from many years ago in Santa Fe, 1992, where homes were sold for an average of about $90,000 near downtown with shared appreciation covenants on it. And you can see is what's that, 15 years old, very well maintained, an asset to the community. This is green building design, a new suburban green homeownership project in Portland, Oregon. We at Enterprise have sponsored a nationwide green communities program that is similar to a LEED Silver standard and give grants to projects that commit to following these standards. And this is a federal tax credit rental project in Durango, Colorado. And we're speaking of these new urbanist communities. This is in a planned community south of Durango called Three Springs. And it's, they are setting aside, and they've agreed through an inclusionary agreement to, among other things, to set aside a series of parcels in this large development, probably a 2,000 home development, to build additional ones of these with architecture, with quality, with neighborhood amenities that just fit right in with the rest of the community. So all of this is to say that it can be done. It's not easy. But we do think, and we see again and again, that communities are really serious about this, that are willing to invest, not just on the regulatory side, but put up some of their treasure in the form of a trust fund, other general funding. It's not cheap. It takes a lot of capital, but it can be done. And where it can be done, we've seen, as in Santa Fe, about 20 or 30% of all new home starts can be affordable. And I mean affordable below those levels we're talking about in Santa Fe. Every community is different. You can't do that in Aspen, no doubt, but there's a lot of hope in these great examples we're seeing in the West. There's a lot more innovation here than we see anywhere else in the country. So very pleased to be here.
Now we'll, if you have questions for any of the panelists, please start to queue up. I also will lead off with some questions. While people are getting mic'd, I'll give them a chance to think about this question. It kind of plays into the presentation we heard right before this, is that the idea that people will drive to qualify in order to qualify to buy a home really has dramatic impacts on our quality of life, dramatic impacts on the environment, growth patterns, time with our families, household incomes. It makes families more susceptible to fluctuations in gas prices. So for each of the panelists, I'd like you to at least start by answering the question of, from each of your perspectives, what are the most important steps that you think communities can take to create more sustainable and affordable communities? Just briefly to answer those, and then we'll go into the questions from the public.
Well, I'll just give an example of working with La Plata County and the city of Durango right now. There's an absolute desire to combine sustainable development with affordable development. So how this is playing out is that the county and the city, I think we're near an agreement, not in writing, but that most, if not all, affordable housing that's intentionally produced should be near the employment centers, and there are really only 3 in the county. The resort areas where actually very few workers want to live because Durango's close by, Durango and Ignacio, where there's lots of oil and gas production. So what we're groping toward is policies and even inclusionary zoning policies that don't encourage, 20 or 30% affordable housing 10, 20 miles from jobs. The principle is that it's going to be near the jobs and services.
I think probably the most important thing we can do is quit investing in bad things and start investing in the things that we know are going to work. I heard Reed Ewing say just the other day, I don't know if you all know who he is, he's a transportation planner, that we should not spend another public penny on building wider roads in this country. It just should stop. I think that's only one example. I think spending public money to build consolidated schools, spending public money to extend sewer services to sprawling places, all of those things have to stop, and we have to rethink how we can invest the money that we have left. We don't have as much, as has been pointed out, as we would have had it. We started this 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But we do still have some, and we still can invest it in better ways. We can invest it in good streets, not just wider streets, but streets that have separated sidewalks and trees and a place for people to walk and bike so that when they aren't able to drive anymore, they actually have that other infrastructure in place. We can invest it in rehabilitating existing buildings instead of tearing them down. We adopted a rehab code in the city of Boise, and we're able to save the original city high school that was due to be consolidated into a bigger high school out in the suburbs, and instead it, for the last five years in a row, has been one of the top 1,000 high schools in Newsweek's poll over, that's academically. We can also, as policymakers, require a little bit more of the development community, and I think green building is a good place to start. City of Boise is considering in its next comprehensive plan update requiring some base of green building in all new buildings, and also looking into what we can do for rehabs. So I guess just for a start, let's start spending our money in the right way.
All right, and to stand on what they both said, I think there are a lot of different tools out there. I think, we worked heavily with our community to allow the 1 house per 25-foot wide lot, which wasn't allowed. Many houses are on 4 and 5 lots. In South Maine, we pushed really hard to have no minimum lot size, so some of our lots are as small as 1,500 square feet. Zoning in things like accessory dwelling units, which are now in our town available by right, and also just getting involved in smart growth and land use principles, and I think a huge part of it's education and really getting out there with a lot of ideas that do exist. And another thing I forgot to say in my presentation is that at South Maine we're requiring everyone get a Built Green Colorado certification, and I think that's getting the town to think, because at first they thought, well, we're this rural town, why would anyone want to do that? And now they're realizing that we're building these houses with very little or much less in terms of utility bills and whatnot. So I think there's a lot out there and a lot to get involved in.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Sir.
Thank you. I wasn't in Missoula when the town discovered that a lot of the houses were built on 2 and 3 and 4 lots, and perhaps you could build more than one on that old yard. I've talked to some of the survivors of that discussion. It wasn't pretty. Elaine, in Boise, I recall, because I was in McCall when a lot of that was going on, the discussion wasn't really pretty either when it first came up. What were the tools that you used to get to consent? I don't think you got consensus, but consent for the policies that moved forward, and what changed from the original idea to what ultimately did go forward in the community?
That's a good question, Roger. In Boise, the idea was embraced, but it was embraced without any regulation. And it was embraced on the philosophy that infill was a good thing and we should be densifying the community. But then the buildings started getting built and they had gravel front yards and they didn't have any fenestration and they didn't have any energy saving features and they had big blank walls and they were, 30 feet tall and 45 feet long, and everybody hated them. It quickly became an emergency, and in fact, we threatened to do an emergency moratorium on them, and instead got consent to do an emergency ordinance instead that much more highly regulated them, requiring sidewalks, requiring landscaping, requiring fenestration. They're the only single-family product in the city that has to go through design review. It's a staff level one, but it's been very important. The last 40 or 50 that have been built under the highly revised standards, there's been 2 iterations of it, so the last standards were just adopted, have been much better received. 6 of them are built to LEED standards, and neighborhoods where they're being built, instead of saying, oh man, not here, we don't want those things, are saying, gosh, those are nice little houses. Maybe, my kid could live in one or so, something like that. So design standards are really important and holding the development community's feet to the fire, but also having a discussion with the community about what you're trying to solve with these, what the benefit to the community is if we can get these right.
Peter, Katie, would you like to address that? No, not so much from the Boise perspective, but how did you build support in the community for development that's different than, and especially affordable housing, in existing neighborhoods?
Yeah, well, I think the points that have been made are right on. I think other than that, it's project by project, and I think the one we heard about South Main is an example. There is a lot of resistance even to well-designed affordable housing. I think excellence in design, whether the city's requiring it or not, is just an absolute. I think the fact that we're starting to see a lot of affordable housing built as green housing and sited well, good site plans, not just nice buildings, is actually given a kind of imprimatur of more quality. So that helps. But, still, I think with something exotic and new, it really has to be taken project by project, and you've got to listen to the neighbors. There's got to be a lot of meetings. There's got to be some compromise, and we just see that over and over. And it's you can't write an exact textbook for that process. You have to listen, and react.
Well, I've actually found that one of the biggest useful tools for that are visual preference stuff. You show imagery of sprawl and imagery of traditional towns. I mean, it's interesting that while a lot of people think that they like low density, you show photos of well-designed high density, and they'll usually prefer that over the more sprawl and low density suburbia. So, again, I think it goes back to education, giving, lots of those presentations on that, getting with people and really, increasing the awareness on that.
Katrine Schultzbart. Katie, what you just referred to is also called design by democracy, and it's a very well-researched kind of topic that you do show things. But I'm up here because I wanted to commend you and give you a compliment for your courage as a developer to speak after Jim Künstler, so I think that probably not very many people would have been successful in doing. But I also have a question to you all three, as we talk about dependency on fuel going from our homes to our working places. Have you heard of or made any use of the location-efficient mortgage program that is available?
I can start that off if you'd like. The city of Boise's been looking into it, and the location-efficient mortgage, for those of you who don't know, is based on a GIS modeling system that the mortgage lenders use to determine whether or not the location of a house that you're proposing to build is close to your work, close to school, and thus will require less in terms of transportation outlay. It was built for Chicago, Los Angeles, Seattle, and Salt Lake City. Anyway, it was built for large cities with relatively robust transit systems. City of Boise doesn't have that, not now. What the city of Boise does have is pretty robust bicycle walking network. And so what we've been looking at is reformulating the model on which it's built, not to rely so much on transit, but to rely on location in terms of other than work trips and being able to walk and bicycle to those. I think it's a great idea. What it does is doesn't reduce the price of the mortgage, but allows you to qualify for a higher percentage mortgage than you otherwise would under the understanding that you'll be spending a lower percentage of your income on transportation. So you get to invest in an appreciable asset rather than expensing a depreciating one.
We haven't seen a lot of usage of those yet, and there should be. Also with the green mortgage, the efficient home mortgages too is an overlay that can help. But again, it doesn't reduce the price of the mortgage interest. It increases the amount you can borrow. I think the reason there hasn't been uptake is that we've just been swimming in credit in this country for the last 15 or 20 years, and increasingly easy to qualify at even ridiculous ratios, not even subprime lending. So you've had people that can qualify for 35, 40% of their income for a mortgage even without those. I think with the subprime contraction that's happening, the lenders are getting a lot more conservative, and they're probably going to get even more conservative, and those will be more important at that point, and they will be affordable to the people that take them because they are spending less money on energy and transportation.
Hi, my name is Wiley Rogers with the State of the Rockies Foundation project. And the Rocky Mountain region is very interesting. We have some of the fastest growing projected population rates in the next 7 years, some of the highest appreciation rates increasing, and the lowest per capita HUD funding for any of the housing programs. How, in lieu of the lack of funding that cities are experiencing in the Front Range and in different places across the Rocky Mountains, how do you effectively encourage private development, and not just for mixed income, 80% average median income for a region, but the lower brackets, the 30% and the 15%, the people who are really struggling to find affordable housing to rent or own?
One of the reasons for the West, or particularly the interior West, getting less HUD money is that a lot of it is formula-based, and that's not going to change. But what I have seen is some federal, not money, but tax incentives left on the table, so to speak, or put on the wrong table. There's a low-income housing tax credit program that probably gets closest to serving that population you're talking about. And I think it's a terrific program because it's not government agencies deciding to invest federal money and poring over plans and approving everything. It's an incentive for both nonprofit and for-profit developers to build rental housing that rents at anywhere between $400 and $600 a month, which is better than most, especially the hot markets. Well, what you find in the hotter markets, like let's say, I'm not sure that Missoula's land prices, but I do know some other communities like Santa Fe and Durango, is that the land cost is too high to make those feasible. So that the very places that are growing, that have the need for this housing, and the jobs, and growing jobs, are sort of disqualified because of the land cost. It's not that hard to fix. Any community that has a trust fund, even a small one, in lieu fees, can begin to, can actually start queuing up land for this kind of development, either buying it or subsidizing it for the right developers. So there's a real quick key to solving part of that. Getting down to 15 or 20% of area median income, that is very, very difficult. And the only program that does that is a federal rent subsidy program. I think there's a stigma on that in thinking that it's you know, for people on welfare and, you know, food stamps and people who are just living off of government subsidy. It's really not the case. The typical people getting Section 8 assistance are working hard, and they're working at $6, $7, $8 an hour. So I'd say, you know, you're not going to get more rent subsidies, but the communities out here could be doing a lot more of those rental projects with the federal tax credits. I showed you an example, I think it was the next to last picture, and I showed you the example of negotiating with a large developer to provide multiple sites for that. And I think you can see the good design, the idea of not sticking it off in some ghetto or corner, integrating it with a very mixed price development. That's, you know, not the whole solution, but part of it.
I'd say the thing that we're doing that's most effective in that, and you're right, the federal subsidies in the West aren't as high, but they're not high anywhere anymore. They've been going down for a number of years, frankly, since the Reagan era, and more of the responsibility for affordable housing is being put onto the private sector. In our region, what we've seen is, as a result, is that most of the federal subsidies and federal money that still does exist does get spent on that much lower segment of the affordability scale. And we're pushing the private sector to provide the affordable housing for what we call the workforce housing. In terms of those real low affordable units, the two things that we've done that have been most successful is providing essentially free land, and you do that by looking at what airspace you have above another use that can be used for this. And in Boise, in two cases, the airspace has been above parking garages. It's really, in some ways, been very interesting because there's a luxury condo unit across the alley from one of them, and they're very upset that what they consider to be very valuable real estate is being given to an affordable housing developer, but it's going to provide 90 of the lowest income units right in downtown Boise for folks who can live and work there. The other thing that we've done with that money in Boise on an affordable ownership basis is a revolving loan fund. We've over the years built it and have allowed people to get into units that need a fair amount of rehabilitation and use that revolving loan fund to get the rehabilitation done. So those are two ways that you can still respond to that.
Just a couple of more thoughts on that. One is certainly keeping people in the homes they're in. A lot of particularly older low-income people do own their homes, so things like circuit breakers or homestead exemptions, continuing to increase those as housing prices go up are an important way to keep some people in homes. Also, preservation of mobile home parks, which is controversial in a lot of places, probably almost impossible to do in some places. But we have seen some great examples in San Diego County, Vermont, Maine, other states that have actually set up programs to allow a nonprofit or the park residents as a cooperative buy out the park and also do improvements, put in better homes or do repairs as needed. So again, none of these are whole solutions, but when you're talking about the real low end, those are important.
Yeah, I'd say that affordability is one of the biggest challenges we're facing right now with cost of construction and cost of land. So, you know, accessory dwelling units, I think, are one way. And then also having, you know, the ability, you know, we're a, you know, mixed use, but also, you know, mixed housing type projects. So having apartments, condos, and also no minimum home size. So that's been fun to introduce houses that may end up being as small as in the 200 per square foot range for some people that want the whole small house movement. But yeah, it's a challenge, and I look forward to hearing more tools from these folks.
Yeah. I think another thing to look at is there is money at the state level for, if it's just how we're spending it, whether it's on transportation. Many state programs, I know Montana's program, has an affordable housing program that also, if the housing price, I think, increased, if your land price was more than 30% of your housing price, you couldn't use the affordable housing program to buy your house. So looking at what type of development we're incentivizing, whether it's affordable or not, and how do we shift those incentives. There is money out there. It's just not, as Elaine said, we may not be spending it in the right ways, and how do we shift those statewide? Go ahead.
Justin Armentrout, and kind of along those same lines, inclusionary zoning. Any ideas on how to kind of entice or win over the development community on that?
What was the last?
Entice the development community on inclusionary zoning in terms of winning them over on the idea or getting them to back it?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work and helped Santa Fe write an ordinance many years ago. City of Cambridge, Flagstaff, some other communities. I'd say a couple of things. One, you shouldn't go in with a standard template for inclusionary zoning because you really have to look at the market. And inclusionary zoning really only works when there's a significant amount of high-end development that can throw off enough profits that the developers can actually pencil this in, go back and negotiate with land sellers, tick up the prices of the high-end units. There's no free lunch. The free lunch can come if the community is willing to add density to the projects to offset that. And I think that it's where it's been successful. The communities have, as they've discussed this, have also expressed a willingness to add densities, to make it at least simple. Builders universally say, if you're going to do it, we don't want you to do it, but if you're going to do it, make it as simple as possible and uniform, a level playing field, not just negotiate one project after another, which they just find to be a nightmare and more expensive. So for instance, in Durango, I can't say all the developers, love the idea, but they're offering it. They're coming in, even absent an ordinance, offering it. I think when you develop the ordinance, they have a whole lot of public meetings and meetings with builders where you can tweak it and you could listen and hear what the local conditions are. But first of all, I wouldn't try it in a sort of moderate market. I'm not. There are many communities, even in the Mountain West, that probably economically it won't work. It has a lot of administrative costs. If it's not going to throw off 30 or 40 homes a year, it may not be worth it because it is complex. So. That's the best answer I can give you. It's got to be tailor-made, very custom-made. You got to listen and react.
The only other thing I would add to that is that if you are going to do inclusionary zoning, expect that there will be a fight. Once you get through the fight, make sure that you stay true to the mission and keep that level playing field. Don't let somebody buy out if that's not an option that everybody gets. Don't make special deals here and there. If everybody has to do it the same way, eventually it will be accepted and it'll just become a part of doing business. But if you make it this uneven, negotiated thing from project to project, it probably will never gain acceptance. But I guess the main thing I would caution is don't expect that it's going to be accepted, even if you do a great public process in the first place.
Let me ask one more question along those lines. How important is it to require the affordable housing units to be distributed throughout the development rather than just ghettoized? in one part.
Yeah, I personally think it's very important, and it's not always possible. I think for the first hurdle is even to get it built on site. Many communities let you opt out by building it off-site or paying in lieu fees. And Santa Fe, for instance, has refused to allow any alternatives. And it's really not just well, I'd have to say it's about social integration. They see a lot of the affordable, newer housing built on the outskirts, which is sort of a de facto ghetto, and they're insisting that every unit be built on site. I've seen some sites very high-end, foothills, tough terrain, where it actually, the only way they could do it was to put some more modest condos in one end, very attractively arrayed. I don't see any problem with that. It depends on scale. I think, tax credit projects are very hard to break up, but I think if it's situated in little nodules, if you will, it doesn't necessarily have to be scattered through, but that's the ideal.
Should we go to the next question?
Could you speak a little bit to the idea of permanency of affordable housing in terms of the community land trust concept, where you remove the value of the land and put in policies that keep that housing cycling through on a permanent basis? Are there other tools to increase the kind of long-term affordability of these units rather than seeing them come on and be flipped to higher price?
Well, you have a land trust, and boy, do you want to go first?
Well, the land trust model is the one that I think is the most accepted around the country. I really, honestly, don't have any experience with a model other than that. I think the land trust model can work effectively. It's also one that allows the government to kind of back out of it and not be the big bad regulator, but just let it work at a market level with a nonprofit using that market to support the work that it's doing to provide the affordability. I honestly don't have any experience with any other model.
I've actually helped set up some land trusts and work with them. I think personally, just speaking for myself, it has very limited application. Unless it's done on a fairly large scale, it has some negatives, and it tends to, speaking of this ghettoization, if you will, I've seen time and again, the one end of the project is the land trust units and the market, if it was true to the principle, the entire development would be in a land trust. So there's some, sort of a two-class housing problem with it. They're complex to administer and need staff in perpetuity to act on the rights of first refusal. And having said all those negative things, there are situations where it makes perfect sense. In Durango, a local college is considering developing 8 acres of campus land as mixed income housing, primarily for faculty, but other community members. And it has to be done on a land lease basis. And there's a new regional housing authority there that's setting up an administrative structure that will be around to administer this, so it makes perfect sense. You have no other choice, really. But there are shared appreciation mortgages, other kinds of deed restrictions, second mortgage liens, and a lot of other ways to you can't keep a unit affordable forever. If you allow any appreciation when the buyer sells in 20, 30, 40 years, you can't keep it affordable forever. So you can do it for longer or shorter periods, but you can also look at recapturing the subsidy, if you will, which in the case of Santa Fe is up about $100,000 a unit. It goes into a soft second, is recaptured, and you can apply that to another house. So
I think we're going to have just one final question, and you've been standing the longest.
Thanks. I work in affordable housing, and I'm also a state representative, and I found it very interesting when, Peter, you were talking about other sources of funding that come through trusts and financing or city support. I sponsored a bill this session to try to put funding in an affordable housing trust fund that is essentially down to zero, and it did not pass. And one of the things I think we face in Montana is a lack of understanding about affordable housing being a public benefit. And I appreciate when I come to this conference, I was able to participate last year as well, kind of getting the holistic picture and listening to Jim Kunstler talk about, what is the vision for a community that is better formed, tightly formed. And when I think about pushing affordable housing out to the outskirts, it's deflecting a lot of problems. And I guess my question and comment simply is, in a community that I'm very proud of here in Missoula that can pass an open space bond for millions of dollars, how do we get communities in the West, and specifically in towns that aren't resort towns but have high amenities, to recognize the public benefit to supporting affordable housing through additional finances? What are some of the tools that you would suggest to a town to be able to get that funding to be infused into our community?
I'll start on that. I guess I would approach it first not from trying to find a public funding to fund affordable housing, but to look at your regulations and try to see what it is in your regulations that is prohibiting affordable housing from being built. You may, in the end, need a public subsidy, but if you can't prove that, it's going to be very difficult to get it. And by looking first at your regulations, second at whatever factors you find when you're looking at that, then you may in the end be able to build support for actual public funding because you've tried other things. And in terms of regulations, I guess I'd like to real quickly touch on a couple of things. Kate talked about accessory dwelling units. If your town does not allow accessory dwelling units, you need to change the ordinance tomorrow to allow them. An accessory dwelling unit is a second unit on any residential lot that is smaller than the first unit. In Boise, we regulate them to be smaller than 1,000 square feet, and one of the two units has to be owner-occupied. It both densifies and allows incredibly affordable housing in every neighborhood. It's self-regulating that way. It comes all over the board, and we require it in every neighborhood, not just in some. But I think that that's an important one. Another important regulatory tool that I don't think is used often enough is a requirement that you cannot build a development that just has one housing style or one housing size. And the regulations that I've seen that work the best in terms of that, you still have to set a minimum. Say it's a 5-acre development or more. You have to have at least two lot sizes and two housing styles. If it's over 20 acres, you have to have 4. And you offer them all kinds of incentives to make some of those attached housing, like row houses, and some of them small lot, single family. You offer them the tools that they can go back and use to create those different kinds of both lot sizes and house sizes. And by doing that, it's been amazing to me to watch how many more affordable units are getting built with nothing more than just requiring that there be different kind of houses and that some of those be smaller than 1,200 square feet.
Very quickly.
I'd take a little different point of view. Not that that's not correct. It's absolutely correct. But there's something like, as the handout says, 30 million families in this country are paying too much for housing, and the percentage is much higher in many of your communities, no doubt, or will be soon. So I think every available mechanism, the federal government is walking away from it. I think if communities are serious about providing affordable housing, they need to put up some local money, just as they do for open space and other important things. So I think certainly you show that you do what you can do with regulation, but communities like Durango are now looking at a levy, whether sales tax or a special property tax levy. Dade County, Florida, for 20 years almost, has had a transfer tax that goes into a trust fund. That's to me, the sign of a real maturity that the community cares so much about affordable housing to put up some money for it. And we can talk on the side about some of the methods of convincing the community.
We're going to need to stop there. Let's give the panelists a round of applause, and then please catch them later.